Welcome, everybody, to the Communication Lecture Series. I am your host, Adam Banks, and this is a podcast where I take a communication topic and lecture over it. Today's topic will be communication within families. Now, it's very important to understand that not all families are the same. We all love our families, at least for the most part. So, don't you think it's important to know how to communicate within a family? Whether it's your mom or dad, or your husband or wife, or children of your own. Now, before we get into the actual lecture, I think it's important to remind everyone that this is an interactive podcast, which means I want to interact with you during this show. Ask questions. Let me answer your questions. You can write a comment on Facebook. You can post the question under the episode in the comment section. You can send your question via email, communicationlectureseries@gmail.com. I will read your question and talk about it on the show. I actually have one question right here that was sent to us from Lakin Harris, and she sent this to our email address, communicationlectureseries@gmail.com. Let's see what Lakin has to say. Lakin says, "Hi, Adam. I have two kids, one 20, the other 18. My 18-year-old just left for college, which means it is now just my husband and I. We are completely lost on how to be married with just ourselves and without our kids in the house. Can you give us advice on how to become a family with it just being us two?" So, Lakin, I think that's a great question. Now, I don't want to say that I'm an expert in marriage. I've never been married, so I'm not the best person to ask who or what to do to make a marriage better. But I will say, and I'll speak on this because I do touch on this later on in the lecture, that when parents let their kids out into the world, we call that launching children. And that is a vital change for most families because parents have to redefine their relationship, what it means to be married. So that's exactly what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to redefine what it means to be in love in your marriage. It's going to take time. I'll give you some great news. A lot of couples find the empty nest years the happiest in their marriage because there are fewer stresses and more couple time. So think positive and look forward to the future. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and without any further ado, let's go ahead and begin our lecture. Before we begin discussing families, we should note that not everyone lives with others. Approximately 25% of households in the United States consist of one person, the greatest number of people living alone in this country's history. The other 75% of Americans have formed diverse types of families. Think for a minute about your friends and acquaintances. How many different family forms do they embody? When I did this exercise myself, I came up with 14 different kinds of families in my social circle. So I am sure that if you sit and do the same, you would come up with many different social circles. So to begin, we should talk about the diverse forms of families. The most common family form in the United States continues to be marriage, although fewer Americans are married today than in the past. Currently, 51% of all Americans are married. However, this percentage is significantly less than the 72% of Americans who were married in 1960. Despite the decline in marriage, a majority of 18 to 34-year-old men and women of all races regard having a happy marriage as a top priority, and 81% of high school students expect to get married. Contemporary Americans are marrying at later ages than previous generations, which particularly accounts for the decline in the percentage of married people. Yet not everyone marries And not everyone who marries stays married. Of adults in the United States, 28% have never married, and the number of unmarried people in the United States has doubled since 1960. Not being married doesn't necessarily mean not having children. There are a lot of single parents out there. So, some cohabitors view living together as a trial marriage that allows them to assess whether they truly want to be together for long term. For other people, cohabitation is a preferred permanent alternative, not just a way to get married, just living with somebody. Families are diverse not only in the people who belong to them, but also in their goals. For instance, for ancient Greeks, the purpose of marriage was to produce an offspring. Historically, Americans have also viewed raising children as a primary objective of marriage. Raising children is no longer seen as the only goal of marriage. Let's look at an example here. Let's say Joanne says this. Joanne says, "I'd be miserable without my job. I love the sense of accomplishment that I get from teaching first graders. When a child finally catches on to reading, it's magic. Being a part of that magic for so many children over the years gives me a sense of purpose in life." So as Jonah points out, many people of both sexes define their work not just as a source of income, but as a central point to who they are. They find work personally fulfilling. As we will see later in this lecture, balancing work and family responsibilities and opportunities is one of the greatest challenges facing families today. So there's all kinds of different types of families. There's cultural diversity of family forms, different religions in families, different races in families. How many of you guys know of interracial couples or know a family who is raising their children, but both parents have different religions? Some marriages require the other spouse to cross over before they will even consider getting hitched. So there's all kinds of different diverse families. Everybody does their family different. Some couples, they have separate bank accounts. Have you ever known of a couple in a marriage who has a separate bank account? Some couples have joint bank accounts. They share every single cent. Some couples sleep in the same bed. Some marriages, they don't sleep in the same bed. They sleep in separate bedrooms. They separate everything to the point to where it's almost like a business partner rather than a wife or a husband. All families communicate, but not all families communicate in the same ways. Each family has its own norms and patterns of communicating. The communication that characterizes a family shapes the closeness, openness, and satisfaction of family members. Clifford Notarius identifies 3 key elements that influence satisfaction with long-term relationship. Those 3 elements are words, thoughts, and emotions. Words refer to how family members talk and behave towards each other. Communication influences self-esteem and feelings about the relationship. In happier relationships, members tend to communicate more support, agreement, and understanding, and interest than in less happy couples. In contrast, unhappy families include frequent criticism, negative statements, mind reading, and egocentric communication in which family members do not engage in dual perspective. The second element in family communication is thoughts, which is how family members think about each other and family. Other thoughts shape our emotions and words. You'll recall from previous lectures that I've given that in satisfying relationships, people tend to attribute nice actions by others to stable internal qualities that are within individual control. For an example, a mother might think, "My son came home from the weekend because he is a thoughtful person who makes time to show me he cares." Likewise, in satisfying relationships, people tend to attribute negative actions and communicate unstable external factors that are beyond individual control. If a daughter forgets to call on her parents' anniversary, the father might explain it by telling himself she forgot because she is an overwhelmed college student with final exams. And finally, a third key to family communication is emotions. Emotions are affected by words and thoughts. How we feel is affected by what we say to others and what we communicate to ourselves through self-talk. For an example, the attributions we make for our patterns, behaviors affect how we feel about those behaviors. If a wife sees her husband's gift of flowers as evidence of his thoughtfulness and caring, she will feel closer to him than if she sees the flowers as something he bought because they were on sale. Many families follow a general pattern of evolution. Although these stages are experienced by many families, they may not apply, for instance, to the development paths of many cohabiting gay, single parents and lesbian couples, nor do all the stages apply to free child marriages, or child-free marriages, rather. Couples who do not have children would not go through stages 2, 3, and 4, or 5 because raising and launching children would not be part of their relationship. So let me go through these stages really quick. There are a total of 7 stages when it comes to the family cycle. The first stage is establishing your family. During this phase, a couple settles into a commitment and get into a relationship, and it works out to the point to where they are now living together. They're doing daily routines, and they're getting accustomed to being labeled as a family. Stage 2 is enlarging a family. That's a major change for a family, is making it bigger. The transition to parenthood typically brings a whole array of joys, problems, challenges, and new constraints for the couple. It also introduces new roles. It introduces a new identity. You are now a working mother, a single mother, a working father, a single father. Stage 3 is developing a family. Parent-child relationships are critical influences on children's identities. A consistently loving, attentive parent cultivates a secure attachment style in the child. Other attachment styles are fostered by other patterns of caregiving. Parents also shape children's self-concepts through labels. For instance, you're such a sweet little girl, or you're such a big, strong boy. And they identify scripts that make it clear who children are and who they are supposed to be. Although fathers tend to spend less time than mothers with their children, today's fathers are more active parents than fathers of previous generations. Stage 4 is encouraging independence. As children get older, they do search for their own independence. This is a natural part of their effort to establish identities which is distinct from those of their parents. Often this stage involves some tension between parents and children. Parents may feel hurt by the children's reduced interest in being with the family. Also, parents may not approve of some of the children's interests or their activities and their friends. Children may feel that the parents are overly protective or intrusive. Stage 5 is launching children. Launching is a time of vital change for most families. Children leave home to go to college. They get married or they live on their own. When the last child leaves a parent's home who has been there for 18 years, it's hard on the parents. For parents, it's an abrupt change. For instance, if there is only one child in the family, when that child leaves, that parent becomes lonely. They all of a sudden have an empty nest. Stage 6 is post-launching of the children. After the departure of children from the home, parents have to redefine their marriage. It's like they're getting married all over again. They've been so used to having children and having different roles. They have to redefine what their marriage is. This period can be a time of lower satisfaction between partners if the couple is out of practice and engaging each other outside of their roles as parents. Let's look at an example here. Gretchen, for instance, says this. Gretchen says, "When our last child left home for college, Brant and I realized how little we had in common as a couple. We centered our lives around the 3 children and family activities. Without any of them in the home anymore, it was like Brant and I didn't know what to do with each other. At first, it was really awkward. If we weren't Christians, maybe we would have divorced. But both of us feel marriage is forever. That meant we had to rediscover each other. We went to a weekend workshop sponsored by our church. It was called Rediscovering Love in Your Marriage. That workshop got us started in finding our way back to each other. That's what Gresham says. And then finally, the last stage is retirement. Retirement brings about further changes in a family's life. Changes that can be either positive or negative. For many people, retirement is a time to do what they want instead of focusing on earning a living. Many people who retire are highly active, often volunteering in community groups, traveling, and taking up new hobbies or interests. There are some guidelines for effective communication in families. We know that families come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and they adopt a wide range of interaction styles and communication patterns. For that reason, families face different challenges and find different ways to meet them. Despite this diversity, 4 guidelines apply to effective communication in most, if not all, families. The first guideline is maintain equity in family relationships. That's one of the most important guidelines, is sustaining a healthy family, is to make fairness a high priority. The responsibilities of maintaining a family should not fall just on one person. The benefits of family life should not be greater for one person than for the other. Guideline number 2 is to make daily choices that enhance intimacy. It's a second important guideline. Although we are not always aware that we are making choices, we continuously choose who we will be and what kind of relationships we will fashion. Intimate partners choose to sustain closeness, to let it wither, to build defensive or supportive climates, to rely on constructive or destructive communication, to deal with conflict, to fulfill or betray trust, and to enhance or diminish each other's self-concepts. The third guideline is to show respect and consideration. For families to remain healthy and satisfying, family members need to demonstrate continuously that they value and respect each other. And then finally, the last guideline is to not sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. We all have quirks and habits and mannerisms that irritate others. For instance, the toothpaste cap being left off the tube, the clinking of a coffee spoon, the loud music played late at night, or watching football every Sunday. In addition, family members frequently constrain one another's schedules and preferences. For instance, when one child in the family becomes vegan, that creates new challenges for shopping and prepping meals. At times, family seems like nothing but a hassle, and yet most of us would never consider giving up our families. We love our family members, and we want them to be in our lives. So you shouldn't sweat the small stuff. So, folks, before we end this lecture, I just want to say that communication in families is very important. It is the key to a successful and a happy family. And if you didn't take anything out of this lecture, just know that all families are different and not all families are the same. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that about wraps up another episode of the Communication Lecture Series. If you want to follow the podcast, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Communication Lecture Series. You can ask us a question by emailing us at communicationlectureseries@gmail.com or write your question on the Facebook page. But until next time, folks, I'm Adam Banks, and I will see you in the next episode.